So we've taken apart the airbrush, we've cleaned it, pre-cleaned it. I guess I could call it pre-cleaning because I like to clean my airbrushes before I start because I like everything to be perfect coming out of it. What I'm going to do now is talk about something that a lot of people take for granted, which is the type of paint you use and the requirements for thinning said paint. I like to use Tamiya paint, and I like their product. I think it's a really great product. What you want to do is, no matter what kind of paint you spray through your airbrush, and this is just my philosophy, use that paint's thinner. I mean, I know it's really tempting to go run out and buy a big jug of something that you think is going to work with everything, but usually the paint base, in other words, the pigment that this paint's made out of, is mixed with the thinner that they sell separately. So when you want to thin that paint down, you want to use the exact same component that the pigment is floating around in, which for Tamiya is the Tamiya thinner. It's a X20 thinner. They sell it in different sizes, small ones, medium ones, and big jugs, which I like. Also, there are paints out there that you really don't need to thin down, which is really nice. Lately I've been playing around with these AK Interactive paint sets, and the really beautiful thing about the AK Interactives is that you don't have to use thinner in them. You can thin it down. If you're airbrushing and you want it, you know, a little more flow or whatever, you can thin it with the AK thinner. But I've discovered that putting on base coats on armor and things like that, this stuff sprays right through the airbrush, right out of the bottle. I put a little color cup onto the airbrush and I just root some of that in there and spray away, and it's great stuff. So thicker paints like Tamiya, you should thin them down. AK sprays right out of the jar. There are enamels, Model Master, various other paints. Humbrol is a enamel-based paint, so you use their thinner with it. And I would caution that when you airbrush, make sure, and even when you're mixing your paint, put gloves on. Go down to the local hardware store, excuse me my reach, and buy yourself a nice big box of vinyl gloves for whatever it costs, $5, $10 somewhere in there probably. And they'll last for a long time. You can get 50 in a box. And I use them constantly. I think it's really crucial that you keep yourself safe. Same with airbrushing. You should, if you're in a constrained area, even if you have a paint booth, get yourself a respirator mask. And I'm not going to put it on today because I'm just demoing and I have to talk to you. But normally when I airbrush anything, I have my respirator mask on. I learned it a long time ago. Keep yourself healthy. This is fun stuff. Just take the precautions. They're easy. Okay, so I'm going to start out by mixing some Tamiya paint. And I'll put my gloves on because I really don't want to get it all over me. And what you want to do is make sure your paint's mixed up. I stirred it up, I'll shake it up. And I'm going to use, there's basically two things you can use to spray paint through your airbrush. You can use either the supplied color cup. A lot of the companies, what they'll do is, well, they all do, when you buy your airbrush, they'll give you a little color cup. The color cup just fits inside the back of the airbrush like that, inside of the siphon tube. And this is nice when you're doing small areas. You can just take it, like I said, and I'll show you how to use this AK with the cup. You just squirt a little bit of your paint in there, and I always take a little wooden popsicle stick that I've broken off, and I just stir up the paint a little bit, if necessary, or if I put thinner in. So you put your color cup on, squirt some paint in it, and you can just go away and paint. The other way that you can spray is with a jar and a lid. The reason these jars and lids are important is because they hold a lot more paint. So if you're doing a big area, you're doing a big model, you want to have a lot of paint. So this is basically the equivalent of a jar of paint you would buy at the store. You know? So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to put my little airbrush in that little stand. That's really convenient. This little Vallejo thing is cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the Tamiya paint. Tamiya paint, usually my rule of thumb is to mix probably about 25 to 35% thinner in it, or like a 3-to-1 mix. I'll put 2 parts Tamiya, 1 part thinner, and stir it up. And I'll show you how I kind of figure out if I've done it well. So I'll put a little bit of the Tamiya in there. Another tip, take a paper towel. Whenever you open a jar of paint, you know, I don't want to be like your mother, but when you open a jar of paint, take a paper towel and wipe off the edge of the paint jar. It's a simple thing you can do that will keep your jars opening until they're out of paint. I don't know, if you've used paint in the past and you open the jar. If you don't do that, this thing's going to seal up. You're going to have to run it under hot water, hit it to open it. So clean your jars off. So I've poured in some Tamiya paint. I'm going to take some Tamiya thinner, and I can either eyeball it, or I like to take these little plastic pipettes that you can get at your local hobby shop, or megahobby.com, and I'll take a little bit of the Tamiya thinner. And you want to keep these clean. If you're using thinner, keep them clean. And I'll estimate. I know how much paint I put in there, and I kind of look at the side of the jar to get an idea. So 3 to 1. And we'll take that. I'll take another one of these little popsicle sticks. I'll mix them up. And what I like to do is I like to drag the paint, I don't know if you guys can see this, along the side of the jar. And if it looks thick, I know that it's not going to go through the airbrush very well. So I'll put a little more thinner in it. Just until it looks like a little wash of paint going down the side of the jar. Thinning paint's one of those things that you get a feel for. In other words, you'll know when you get it right as you work with this and you do it a little bit more and more. It's like riding a bike. Once you learn, you don't forget. So after I mix the thinner into the Tamiya paint, I just seal it up into the jar and you're ready to paint. So we've mixed our paint. We're ready to do just a little bit of spraying. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hook the paint jar up to my airbrush here. Just stick it right into the tube, into the pilot tube there. And I'm going to show you what's important, or the advantage, or what's great about a double action airbrush. If I was shooting, say, a single action airbrush, what would happen, and I'm going to tell you before I turn the air compressor on because that makes a lot of noise. I'd press my trigger and I'd be set to a particular line. In other words, I would spray and the line would stay the same size all the way over. That's a single action. To change that, I would have to stop spraying, readjust my nozzle, and then spray the other size line. The advantage of a double action airbrush is I can spray that line and I can change the width of the line, greater or smaller, just by moving the trigger back and forth. And that brings the needle in and out of the front of the airbrush. So that doesn't sound like much, but that's a real advantage when you're airbrushing, because you can do all kinds of camouflage patterns and you can do all kinds of blending and highlights and shading by making things larger and smaller just by moving your trigger around. It's really great. So I'm going to turn the air compressor on, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how I spray a line and increase it and decrease it by moving the trigger back and forth. Double action. Do it again. So you can see I start out with a really fine line here. As I pull my trigger back, the line starts to increase and it gets larger and larger. So that's really important, because if I go back to do any kind of effects where I need the line to vary, I can do it just with a single stroke of the trigger. Before you spray anything, shoot your brush a little bit. In other words, hold it away from the model or whatever you're painting and just give it a little touch, and any paint that's sitting in the nozzle will shoot out, because that happens when you stop spraying. A little bit of paint builds up there. So always remember, shoot it off to the side and then start shooting. So you can see we can do different size lines. You can do different patterns with the airbrush. That's the advantage of an airbrush. It gives you the ability to do spray masking. You can do feathered edges. You can do all kinds of things with this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to bring it over here and show you cleaning out the paint. We've demonstrated the advantages of a double action airbrush and what it can do, and the advantages of airbrushing. One of the most important things you need to keep in mind is that your tool only functions as good as you keep it. In other words, it really needs to be cleaned. An airbrush is one of those tools that if you don't clean it well, it won't function properly the next time. So I know it's a pain and it takes a lot of time, but it's important. So I've sprayed some paint. I bring the airbrush back to the table and I remove the handle. And I have this little tool here by Vallejo, a paint company, acrylic paint company, and make really nice product. And it's basically a tool to collect the vapors from an airbrush when you're cleaning it. You should be in a paint booth or in a well-ventilated area, But if you use one of these, it collects the vapor when you shoot thinner through it instead of it shooting all over your workbench. And I've discovered with this one, with the Pache brush, the best way to use it is to stick it in upside down into the holder here. Very convenient. Take a little bit of the thinner that you're using and put it in directly into the nozzle of the airbrush. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on the compressor. I'll press my trigger down. It'll shoot paint through there and it'll clear out the air gun. It'll clean out the excess paint from after doing that. So let me turn the air compressor on. And basically I'm just shooting it, and I can see it going down inside and it's shooting into there. And as I sit there, I can put a couple more drops in there. The idea is just to clean out all the paint that's still in there. And I'll just stop it, take it out of here. And if you're just between colors, if I just sprayed brown and I'm going to shoot green, if you're shooting a primary color like white or yellow, I'd suggest cleaning the airbrush all the way out, because those colors will change if there's any residue inside. But if you're just shooting green and going to brown or complementary kind of colors, all you have to do is that, shoot some paint through it, then take the needle off by unscrewing the chuck in the back, take the needle out. A little bit of thinner on a paper towel with your pipette. These are really handy too. They're cheap and you'll use them all the time. And then wipe the needle off through that. And you can see there's still some residue in there. And put it back. And now you're ready to shoot another color. But, well, I would also suggest taking one of these little nylon brushes really quickly and putting it up into there where the paint jar was, just gently. And you don't want to scratch anything, just gently. Just clean out any excess. Put your handle back on the back and you're ready to airbrush. Go to your next color. And when you're done all your painting, when you've done all your colors and you're getting ready to go to bed and you want to put it away, it's time consuming. Do the other. Take it all apart. Take the nozzles off, take the needle out, wipe them down, make sure it's clean on the inside, get yourself these little nylon brushes. Clean it all up before you put it away. Thanks for joining us at megahobby.com. Come to see us on the web for all of your hobby needs.